Coming in at number 5, we've got Khooni Nala. We'll kick off the list with a tale that seems to transcend geography entirely, the tale of the disappearing hitchhiker. Khooni Nala is India's answer to the ubiquitous urban legend. For those unfamiliar, the disappearing hitchhiker is the tale told around the world with different variations based on where exactly it's being told. Usually it involves a downtrodden person looking for a ride on the side of a remote road. If you give them that ride, they'll enter your vehicle but disappear soon without a trace. If you ignore them, you'd better be ready for trouble. Back to Khooni Nala. It's been said that there is a stretch of highway known as a hot spot for misfortune. Accidents would occur regularly, earning it the name of Khooni Nala. Soon, people began to believe that the whole area was haunted. These beliefs were compounded when reports of ghostly women started cropping up. People told tales of seeing a woman in a black sari holding a baby, trying to flag down vehicles. If you pick her and the child up, they'll get in the back, remain quiet for a bit, and then disappear entirely. However, if you ignore their pleas, the woman will curse you, dooming to die in a car accident. The amount of accidents around here are high too, making the tale of the dangerous woman even more believable. Make sure you're being a good Samaritan when cruising the back roads, eh? Coming in at number 4, we have the Jinn House. A jinn is an intelligent spirit that may appear in many different forms. Often they're malevolent, causing problems for people all over the place. Sometimes they will possess people, other times they'll lead them astray. However, like most ghostly figures, it is possible for a jinn to have good intentions. But that's not the case in this tale though. People tell of a house haunted by such a spirit, the location of which seems to vary. It seems that there was once a family who lived in said house, but they were scared off by the spirit. Or maybe something more sinister happened. These days though, the jinn is more likely to get into harmless trouble. Mostly. Apparently it will throw visitors' shoes out of the house. See, it's considered good manners to remove one's shoes before entering a home in India. The jinn uses this as an opportunity for mischief, throwing the unattended footwear out onto the street. Many have claimed that they never believed this, and that is until they saw it with their own 2 eyes. You might think that a few flying shoes wouldn't be enough to condemn a house as haunted. Maybe somebody's just pulling a harmless prank after all. However, there have been reports of odd and upsetting sounds coming from within the house too, making the haunted tales seem a little more real. Add in the fact that many have reported becoming ill soon after entering, and you've got a house that might be best left alone. Who knows? Maybe the house is structurally unsound and the jinn is actually a friendly one, encouraging people to leave before it falls in on them. Maybe I'm just being optimistic.
Coming in at number 3, the monster of Elizabeth Lake. Now I should preface this point by saying that there are at least 10 different Elizabeth Lakes in California, but the one we're talking about today is in LA County near Palmdale, and is perhaps the oldest one in the state. Now it is said that Elizabeth Lake was created by the devil himself for the keeping of his hellish pets. The legend also goes on to state that if you swim deep enough, you will stumble across the passageway to hell. Throughout the years, there have been countless sightings of a monster that is said to have the neck of a giraffe, head of a bulldog, bat wings, and is said to be 50 feet long with a rancid scent of decay. For over a century, sightings have been reported and strike fear into the locals' hearts. It is said that locals have been so scared that landowners would actually sell or completely abandon their properties. Not to mention any attempt to build on the lake's land has come to no avail. At night, residents could hear screams from the lake and would have horribly disturbing visions. Farm animals would also disappear, and sightings of flying winged creatures were also reported. However, like all urban legends, any proof of creatures' existence or death is yet to be discovered. Coming in at number 2, we have Turnbull Canyon hauntings. Turnbull Canyon is a 4-mile loop located near Whittier, California, and is part of Puente Hills Preserve. Turnbull is known for the view it provides of the Heisler Temple and Rose Hills Memorial Park. However, it has also been the source of rumors regarding paranormal activities. Death is said to reside within the canyon, with the place itself once being referred to as Khooni Nala, which means the place of the devil. The legend tells of the region being haunted by the Indians who were murdered for not converting to Catholicism. Their spirits are now said to linger in unrest in the canyon. Years later, Turnbull would also be the site of numerous satanic rituals held by cults attempting to conjure demons or even Satan himself, often by sacrificing children from the nearby orphanages. However, one day one of the sinister cults suddenly vanished, and what was left behind in their wake were paranormal sightings and occurrences being reported by hikers and locals, who have also claimed to have seen hooded figures, hellish creatures, and mutilated children. Not to mention more mysterious deaths have since occurred, with one teenager being electrocuted while exploring the ruins by an old asylum in the canyon. A plane also crashed there in 1978, taking the lives of 29 people. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Hollywood sign Spirit. Probably one of the most infamous infamous legends to come out of California is the Hollywood sign Spirit, which is said to be haunted by early 1900s actress Peg Entwistle. Entwistle was a British stage and screen actress who began her career back in 1925, appearing in several Broadway productions. By 1932, during the height of the Great Depression, Entwistle was in Los Angeles with a role in the Romney Brent play The Mad Hope starring Billy Berg. Following that, Entwistle found her first and only credited film role for radio pictures called 13 Women. However, on September 18, 1932, a woman was hiking below the Hollywood sign when she found a woman's shoe, purse, and jacket. She opened the purse and found a suicide note, after which she looked down the mountain and saw the body below. Entwistle's body remained unidentified until her uncle, with whom she had been living with, identified her remains. The suicide note was eventually published and read as follows. I am afraid. I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E. Nowadays, Entwistle is referred to as the Lady in White, who is said to appear to people hiking to the off-limits part of the sign, where she killed herself. However, as opposed to appearing as the beautiful actress she is often seen with a skeletal face and deep hollowed-out eyes. It is also said that if hikers are alone, the Lady in White will influence them to also plummet off the Hollywood sign.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Cannibal Babysitter. Like most great urban legends, this is a tale that has been adapted for many different audiences. Back before the inception of the internet, a similar tale was told of a babysitter who may have been drunk, may have been high, but definitely accidentally cooked a baby instead of a meal. Whoops. It plays on the classic parental fear of leaving your child with someone else. Sure, you'd like to put your trust in someone and have some time to yourself, but how do you really know what's happening if you're not there yourself? Imagine coming home to a sink full of greasy bones and a lunatic babysitter lounging on your couch. Yeah, those aren't chicken bones, are they? To modernize this tale, the World News Daily Report put out an article headlined, Missouri, Babysitter on Crystal Meth Eats 3-month-old Toddler. This is a masterpiece of a shareable article. Parents, people who hate addicts, people who watch horror movies, and Missourians all have a reason to be invested here. Is Missourians a real word? The article details a couple coming home after a night out to find their babysitter drunk and high, covered in blood. Not a good scene. They head to the kitchen and discover something even more terrifying. Their baby in the microwave, covered in barbecue sauce. How anyone could read this and not think it's a joke is beyond me. But apparently it was effective enough to cause a small panic and spread to all sorts of places. Unfortunately for those who skim headlines, it was all a hoax. The World News Daily Report is a fake news site. Not quite parody, but definitely not to be taken seriously. They even put a little disclaimer at the bottom saying that they're not including any reality in their articles. Although I suppose people fooled by this don't often read all the way to the bottom though. Coming in at number 4, what's in my Red Bull? We all know that energy drinks are often under fire for including artificial stimulants. They'll rot your brain, teeth, gut, and hardwood flooring, or so I've been told. Remember that lady who had the whole science fair presentation on why Monster Energy drink is actually the mark of the devil? 666? Good times. Well, if you wanted to scare the crap out of vegans, cowboys, and generally anybody who doesn't want to unknowingly ingest reproductive fluids, you could tell them about this urban legend. Somehow, the rumor that Red Bull includes bull semen in their beverages took off. You see, Red Bull has taurine. This is an organic acid which is actually often found in infant milk formulas. If we dive a little deeper into this word, taurine, we'll find a couple of things. 1, taur is a Greek or Latin root for bull. Still with me? The second half, ine, something derived from a bull, eh? Understandably, people thought of this and immediately came to the conclusion that taurine is something made by a bull, which is actually supported by the fact that it was originally isolated from ox bile, although these days we know that it's found in many more animals, including humans. But back to the stuff made from bulls, people heard taurine and then saw that big red bull on the front of the can and thought, geez, what are they taking from bulls? This stuff that gives you energy? Makes you feel alive? Are the good folks at Red Bull feeding us vital essence from bulls? Ew. Once this conclusion was made, it spread like wildfire. In fact, it became such a popular theory that Red Bull had to address it on their website. If you visit it and look at the FAQ, you can find a Q&A pertaining to the idea of testicles in your drink. Q. Is taurine made from bull's testicles? Is taurine a derivative of bull's testicles or semen? A. The taurine in Red Bull energy drink is a purely synthetic substance produced by pharmaceutical companies and is not derived from animals or animal materials. All ingredients for Red Bull energy drinks are synthetically produced by pharmaceutical companies. This guarantees the highest quality. So there you have it. No need to worry about any funny business in your Red Bull. Just try not to drink too much in celebration.
Coming in at number 3, the catacombs. The catacombs of Paris are underground ossuaries which hold the remains of more than 6 million people in a small part of a tunnel network built to consolidate Paris' ancient stone quarries. Now, it was largely forgotten until it became a novelty place for concerts and various other private events in the early 19th century, as well as a hotspot for urban explorers. Now, as you would expect, there are a ton of legends surrounding this creepy burial site, so I'll be listing off a handful. Let's start with the ghost of Philbert S. Park. During the French Revolution, Philbert was a doorman at the Val de Grace Hotel. During a mission to fetch a liqueur from a cellar, Philbert wound up in the Paris catacombs instead, walking around in the darkness alone with just a single candle. He became lost and confused. His body was not found until 11 years later when a group of cataphiles uncovered it. His body is now buried in the catacombs in the exact spot that he was found. Legend now states that on each November 3rd, Philbert's ghost haunts the labyrinth of the catacombs. However, the most disturbing story hails from the 1990s when a group of cataphiles were walking through the catacombs and discovered a video camera on the ground. To their surprise, the camera held footage on it. While watching the footage, it became apparent that the man filming was lost and had no idea how to escape the winding tunnels. The video then ends abruptly with the man dropping the camera on the ground and running off into the unknown. He was never discovered. However, it was this legend that many believe As Above, So Below, the movie, was based off of. Coming in at number 2, we have The Phantom of the Opera. We're all familiar with the 1986 musical based on the book by Gaston Leroux, with music by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Its central plot revolves around a beautiful soprano, Christine Daae, who becomes the obsession of a mysterious, disfigured musical genius living in the subterranean labyrinth beneath the Paris Opera House. But did you know this story is actually based on legend, with many Parisians being all too familiar with the story of the Phantom and the mysterious box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House. This legend began at the Music Conservatory on Rue Les Pelletiers, where it is said that a young pianist and a young ballerina fell in love. Planning to be wed, the pianist composed a piece of music to symbolize their love that was intended to be played at their wedding. However, that never happened because on October 28, 1873, a fire destroyed the conservatory and killed many, including the ballerina. The pianist survived but was forever scarred by the fires, particularly on his face. He abandoned the world and took refuge in the underground passage of the Garnier Opera House in order to escape the dreadful people who considered him a monster or a demon. He stayed there for the rest of his life, devoting himself to his music. Now, the pianist was never disturbed, but rumors quickly began to spiral, creating the legend of the Phantom of the Opera. The first rumors came from the opera house staff, such as stagehands and dancers. It is also purported that box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House is said to be haunted by the mysterious Phantom and should always be left vacant for him. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Notre Dame and the Devil's Door. Notre Dame is one of the most infamous places in French history, with it being a medieval Catholic cathedral that was consecrated to the Virgin Mary and is considered to be one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture. However, popular interest in the cathedral blossomed after the publication of Victor Hugo's novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, back in 1831. The cathedral is holy ground, but saying that how many tourists from around the world have been ushered in by Satan himself. Some history first though. When it comes to the construction of buildings such as this one, construction always starts at the back of the building, with the entrances added last. So when it came time to add the famous door to the cathedral, a man by the name of Mr. Biscornet, a young metalsmith, convinced the church to hire him. The job lasted months, with Biscornet slaving away in his workshop. However, when he finally finished, it was of course a masterpiece and blew the minds of Parisians. However, were the doors perhaps too good to be true? This all took place during the 1300s, when magic was believed and myths spread fast. So when people saw the door for the first time, they believed that Biscornet couldn't possibly have crafted it himself, and that instead he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for the masterpiece. Stories quickly began to emerge of people claiming to have visited Biscornet during the creation and found him unconscious on the floor, with the project mysteriously completed. The rumors began to spread, with priests adding fuel to the fire by claiming that the door's locks refused to work until they were sprinkled with holy water. To top things off, not long after this, the artist died, with many speculating that in order to fulfill the contract, the devil had to claim Biscornet's soul.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the two-striped Telemonious spider. We're gonna start this one off with an older tale. This one was actually quite popular back in the late 90s, the golden age of chain emails. It's likely that this urban legend was so effectively spread thanks to the relative inexperience of all online users, but it almost seems too silly to be real nowadays. Actually, wait. There are much less believable stories flying around the internet today. Never mind. Back to the actual urban legend though, there were many reports of the venomous two-striped Telemonia spider being found under public toilet seats. You know, as spiders do. Accounts were widespread, with stories popping up with various twists, making them seem like these spiders were biting and killing toilet users all over America. In fact, it got so popular that the Telemonia got a nickname, the butt spider. Seems legit. It gained notoriety through lots of chainmail and reposts, you know, the kind of stuff that your tech-illiterate great aunt would fall for. Don't forget to look, this is really scary in the subject line, etc., etc. One of the most famous chain emails detailed 3 bites in Chicago. The recipient suffered from fever, chills, vomiting, muscular collapse, paralysis, and eventually death. Sheesh, that is a scary spider, all from sitting on a toilet seat. The 3 women who fell victim to this terrible spider were seemingly unconnected until it was discovered that they had all recently visited the same restaurant. At first, people were blaming the food until a waitress came in to grab her check and use the washroom without eating. She also fell victim to these symptoms, which prompted investigators to check out said washroom. Lo and behold, they found a spider who liked cold, damp climates and had a deadly bite. The Arachneus gluteus. Seems silly now, but this spider was taken very seriously back then. This urban legend was actually started by a guy named Steve who wanted to prove how silly chainmail could be. He dropped in a bunch of hints like the name of the spider to ensure nobody would take it too seriously. But people still did, and they even put their own spin on the story, replacing ridiculous aspects with real ones. And as it circulated more folks became afraid of spiders and public washrooms. Way to go, Steve. You nailed it. Coming in at number 4, we have teens sewing their mouths shut. Parents will believe anything if they think it's harming their kids. Video games cause violence, classic books are bad influences, there are secret demonic messages in pop music. Now, those examples have been around for a while, even pre-internet. However, now that the internet is alive and well, there is a whole new category of bunk that people will believe has undue influence on their children. Viral Facebook posts with new moral panics attached each week. Stories about bullying, predators, dangerous apps, and more. It's enough to make your head spin. If someone can find an image of something seemingly dangerous and put a panicky caption below it, you better believe that all the Karens and Carols will share it like there's no tomorrow. The one we'll talk about today seems to imply that teens are going to undergo extreme body modification just for kicks. Folks were saying that teenagers had been sewing their mouths shut with needle and thread. I mean, I can see maybe giving yourself a piercing or a stick and poke tattoo, but why on earth would anybody sew their whole mouth shut for no reason? Posts were shared with an image of someone's lips apparently sealed via sewing kit, and folks were terrified that their kid would be the next to do it. Well, as it turns out, nobody was actually permanently closing their mouths. So what was actually going on? Apparently somebody had taken a screen grab from a YouTube makeup tutorial and convinced the world it was real. The actual image came from Promise Fan, who was doing a Halloween-themed video where she cut dark string to different lengths and glued the pieces above and below her lips. It's a pretty convincing illusion with some makeup used to color the spot where each piece ended to make it look bloody and bruised. However, if you watch the video, you'd know that just by opening her mouth, the pieces fall away. But try convincing a soccer mom frothing at the mouth, though.
In at number 3, House of Death, New York. On 14th West 10th Street in Greenwich Village in New York stands a picturesque home, which is now known as the House of Death, with it having a less than cute history. Since its construction back in the 1850s near the start of the Civil War, 22 people have reported to have died in the home, and according to the New York Post, some of their spirits have never left. Some residents over the years have reported sightings of Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, who lived in the building between 1900 and 1901. Sightings of the author have been reported on the first floor of the home near the staircase, with him said to be wearing a white suit. Allegedly, the spirit stated, "My name is Clemens and I has a problem here I gotta settle." A few years later, after the sighting, the house was converted into a 10-unit apartment building. However, the hauntings did not cease. According to the New York Post, actress Jan Bryant Bryant Bartell and her husband moved into the apartment on the top floor in 1957 and immediately felt a monstrous moving shadow that loomed up behind her. After she left the home, she published a memoir where she wrote about feeling a brush against the back of her neck and smelling a rotting odor throughout the apartment. She went on to state that on one particular occasion she saw a vision of a man and she reached out to him. She stated that she touched a substance without substance, chilly damp, diaphanous as March mist or a cloud of ether. Coming in at number 2, Lalaurie Mansion, New Orleans, Louisiana. Located on 1140 Royal Street in New Orleans is the Lalaurie Mansion, a home which was reported to be one of the most haunted places in the world. Some may also be familiar with this house as it was depicted on American Horror Story Coven. Now this home is where slaves were tortured at the hands of Delphine Lalaurie. Born Marie Delphine McCarty, but more commonly known as Madame Lalaurie, she was a New Orleans socialite and serial killer who, like I said, tortured and murdered slaves in her home. Accounts of Lalaurie's treatments of slaves between the years of 1831 to 1834 are mixed. However, Harriet Martineau, writing in 1838, claimed that enslaved people kept by Lalaurie were observed to be singularly haggard and wretched. However, in public appearances, Lalaurie was seen to be generally polite to them. Now, everything changed when a fire broke out in the home on April 10, 1834, which began in the kitchen. When the police were called and the fire marshals arrived, they found the cook chained to the stove by her ankle, with her later stating that she had started the fire as an attempt to end her life. As reported in the New Orleans Bee of April 11, 1834, bystanders responding to the fire attempted to enter the quarters of the enslaved people to ensure that everyone had been evacuated. Upon being refused the keys by the Lalauries, the bystanders broke down the doors to the quarters and found, I quote, 7 slaves, more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by their neck with their limbs apparently stretched. When the discovery was made and the news broke out, a mob of local citizens attacked the Lalauries' residence and demolished and destroyed everything upon which they could lay their hands. Now, the original mansion occupied by Lalaurie did not survive, with the mansion on the corner of Royal Street, which is commonly referred to as the Lalaurie Mansion, not being the same building inhabited by Lalaurie. Despite that, many believe that the ground itself is still haunted. And finally, coming in at number 1, Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, Massachusetts. First and foremost, Lizzie Borden was an American woman who was the primary suspect in the 1892 axe murders which took place at the home in Fall River, Massachusetts. The victims were Lizzie's father and her stepmother, with her being ultimately acquitted of the murders. Now, this case received a huge amount of attention across the United States, and following her release from jail where she had been held during the trial, Lizzie opted to remain in the same area where the deaths occurred, despite facing ostracism from other residents. Lizzie ultimately spent the remainder of her life in Fall River before passing away of pneumonia at the age of 66. The Lizzie Borden house is of course the home where the Borden family lived, with it being located on 232nd Street in the city of Fall River. From 1874 to 1892, the house was the property of Andrew Borden, Lizzie's father, who was a member of Fall River High Society. After Lizzie's trial and ultimate acquittal, she bought another home located on 7 French Street that she named Maplecroft. This is where she remained until her death. Now, as of today, the Borden house operates as a bed and breakfast, and it has been doing so since 1996. It is currently owned by Martha McGinn, whose grandparents purchased the home back in 1948. According to Martha, the room where Lizzie's stepmother was found murdered is the most requested room of the bedrooms at the B&B, which is incredibly sick and twisted. Coming in at number 5 is the ghost of Stowe Lake. The history of Stowe Lake, located in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, is shrouded in mystery. Stowe Lake is said to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who, after attempting to save her child who fell in the water, drowned in the lake. Now, legend goes that this woman, referred to as the White Lady, so always the White Lady, wanders the edges of Stowe Lake as she searches for her baby. It is said that she can even be summoned by visitors, with the most active area surrounding the lake being near the Pioneer Women and Children statue. The legend states that the statue, depicting a woman with children, houses the spirit that haunts Stowe Lake. People have noted that at night the statue seems to have 3 children surrounding her instead of 2 older ones and one that is barely a toddler. Anyone wishing to summon the White Lady can do so by calling out, White Lady, I have your baby, 3 times, which seems very cruel if you ask me. Now, if she believes you, the woman will appear before you and will ask for her baby back. However, for doing this, the woman will haunt you for the rest of your life. However, if you tell the woman you don't have her baby, legend says she will drag you into Stowe Lake and give you the same death she suffered. It is also noted that the White Lady of Stowe Lake is not the only ghost to be found residing in San Francisco, of course, and if you wish to explore the creepy haunted history, you can do so with Haunted San Fran Ghost Tour. Coming in at number 4, we have the Dark Watchers. The Dark Watchers is a name given to a group of entities in California folklore purportedly seen observing travelers along the Santa Lucia Mountains. The Dark Watchers are said to be tall, sometimes giant-sized featureless dark silhouettes often adorned with brimmed hats or walking sticks. They are phantoms that are said to lurk inside the Erie Mountains. Legend has it that the Dark Watchers have claimed to be seen staring out at the vast space below the mountains before completely vanishing. Now, this legend may be attributed to the Chumash people who historically inhabited the central and southern coastal regions of California, with the ghostly figures first appearing in their Indian history and lore. The cave walls were donned with drawings by the Chumash that depicted these phantoms. John Steinbeck also went on to write about the Dark Watchers in his story Flight, where the creatures were described as dark forms against the sky. I quote, "Pepe looked suspiciously back every time or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business." Steinbeck's son, Thomas Steinbeck, would also grow up to report having seen the Dark Watchers during his childhood, and later, along with artist Benjamin Braid, collaborated on a book titled In Search of the Dark Watchers, where they go into the history of the legend and interview locals who claim to have seen them, such as the famed Big Sur resident Billy Post. In more recent history, sightings occurred in the 1960s by a Monterey High School principal.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Tomino's Hell. You've likely heard of Dante's Inferno, which, while often quite disturbing, doesn't come with a curse attached. Tomino's Hell does. This poem by Saijo Yaso depicts a young boy descending into hell for unnamed crimes. Sweet Tomino is going to Jigoku, the Buddhist hell. Speaking of Jigoku, if you haven't seen the flick of the same name by Nobuo Nakagawa, drop what you're doing and watch it right now. Not only is it a fantastic visual marvel of a movie, it'll also make the story much scarier through its depiction of Buddhist hell. It's never explicitly stated in the poem, but it appears as if Tomino is heading down for killing his family. Apparently, if you read this poem out loud, you'll be cursed. Misfortune and death will follow anyone who decides to recite it. Back when this tale was first circulated, there were plenty of folks who would post on 2chan claiming that they were going to try. Photos, videos, and sound clips of people reading the poem were posted. Many said that nothing happened to them, but some others never returned after saying the cursed words aloud. The poem itself isn't very long, so I considered reading it aloud for everyone out there, but kind of like not being cursed, so maybe I'll wait for a day when I feel more open to eternal torment. Feel free to try yourself though. Coming in at number 2, we've got Kuchisake Onna. It's hard to come up with a Japanese urban legend more popular than the slit-mouthed woman. She's on every list, featured in every article, plastered on the front of all sorts of movies, manga, and anime. This is an urban legend with staying power. The story goes that late at night, a woman wearing a surgical mask will approach lone travelers. Oftentimes, these solitary strollers will be children. She'll ask them, "Am I beautiful?" And if you answer no, you're cooked. She'll pull out a pair of gnarly scissors and kill you on the spot, so be nice. If you answer yes, she'll remove her mask, revealing a gruesome, grotesque grin. Her mouth has been lengthened, and what I mean by this is that her face is slit from ear to ear. Then she'll ask you the question again. If you answer no, well, you're still cooked, you die. But if you give her a positive answer, you're not much better off this time. Kuchisake Onna is so relieved that someone thinks she's beautiful, she'll want you to join in on the fun. The scissors come out and she'll give you a smile just like hers. Now you're twins. If you'd rather keep your life and your facial structure, you can try to confuse her. By answering with wishy-washy statements, you might find a window with which to escape. Some say that answering her questions with more questions can also result in confusion. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how did she end up with that slit mouth? It's been said that she was an adulterous wife and her husband caught her cheating. In a rage, he cut her mouth, asking, "Who will think you're beautiful now?" Yikes. The surgical mask has always been a popular accessory in Japan, as it's considered good manners to wear one when you're sick. Now that masks are everywhere as a result of the current pandemic, do you think Kuchisake Onna will be making some appearances elsewhere? And finally, at number 1, we've got Akamanto. This one scares me because of where it tends to happen. See, Akamanto, or Red Cloak, is a masked spirit who appears before folks using public restrooms. I like my privacy, thank you very much. There are many different variations on this legend, but usually the spirit will appear in a red cloak and ask someone on the toilet a question. Red toilet paper or blue? Just like the Matrix. However, there's less actual choice here. Pick either one and you'll end up the same. Choose red and you'll die a bloody death. Choose blue and you'll suffocate to death. turning blue. Even if you decide you'd rather use plain old white toilet paper, you'll be pulled to hell by a ghastly apparition. There is no winning here. Or is there? Apparently, you can leave the loo with your life if you politely refuse both options, or if you ignore the toilet ghost outright. I mean, that's probably what I would do in the first place. Nobody needs some weirdo offering them premium TP when they're using the public bathroom. I accepted my one-ply fate when I came in here. You can also just run away without wiping, but come on, we've got standards, don't we? Apparently this myth dates all the way back to the 1930s. This toilet paper ghost has longevity.
In at number 5, we have Jim Morrison. Born James Douglas Morrison, he was a singer, songwriter, and poet who served as the lead vocalist of the rock band The Doors. However, Morrison developed an alcohol dependency during the 60s, with him passing away unexpectedly at the age of 27 in Paris. As no autopsy was performed, the cause of his death remains unknown. He was ultimately laid to rest in the famous Père Lachaise cemetery. Over the years, his headstones were defaced or stolen until Morrison's own father placed a rather ordinary-looking one on the site with an inscription in Greek, which reads, "Against his own demon." However, in 1997, journalist Brett Meisner was visiting the cemetery when he had this photo taken of him, standing in front of Jim Morrison's headstone. However, in the background of the picture, standing in the doorway of a crypt, you can clearly see a semi-transparent figure, arms held wide, which resembles the late singer. Many state that the pose is very reminiscent of a famous photo taken of Morrison. What do you guys think though, ghost or trick of the light? Whatever you think, it's been enough to drive more tourists to the cemetery to attempt to catch a glimpse of the famous singer. In at number 4, we have Sweeney Todd. Now, hear me out before we begin. Yes, I know that Sweeney Todd is said to hail from Victorian London, however this legend states that maybe he didn't, and maybe he walked the streets of France. First and foremost though, Sweeney Todd is a fictional character who appeared as the villain of the Victorian petty dreadful serial The String of Pearls. The tale became a staple of Victorian melodrama and London urban legend. A barber from Fleet Street, Sweeney Todd murders his customers with a straight razor and turns their bodies over to Mrs. Lovett, his partner in crime, who bakes their flesh into meat pies. However, could it be that the original Sweeney Todd was not from London, but instead hailed from medieval Paris? Legend states that Paris had its very own demon barber during the 14th century, and was perhaps the first home to the cannibalistic pastries from the murderous barber. During this time, the Rue de Marmousets was known far and wide for its succulent French delicacies, especially for those made by a butcher next door to a barbershop on the corner. The pies and pastries were said to be so tasty that even King Charles VI was said to have been a fan. From 1384 to 1387, the butcher was said to have been in cahoots with his neighbouring barber, with it being said that the pastries were so scrumptious thanks to the young flesh of the victims of the demon barber. The partnership was said to have thrived for 3 years and would have continued if their gory deeds weren't discovered. It was said that an abandoned dog was what gave them away, who was barking outside the door of the barbers. The police conducted a search and discovered heaps of humans' bones and flesh in the shed underbelly of the 2 shops. For their crimes, the barber and the butcher were burned alive, along with their shops, in order to exorcise the area from their evil. Coming in at number 3, NASA is a lie. It is common knowledge that many conspiracy theorists believe the Apollo moon landings to be a hoax, with some even theorizing that director Stanley Kubrick filmed it on a soundstage. However, theorists have taken things further by speculating that NASA itself isn't real, and that instead it exists to generate space-related hoaxes. People have even taken to Twitter with the hashtag NASA hoax, with some even stating that pictures of Mars, Pluto, and even Earth are fake or CGI. However, in actuality, NASA was formed back in 1958 to provide research into problems of flight within and outside the Earth's atmosphere, and for other purposes according to the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958. Since then, NASA has launched hundreds of satellites into orbit around Earth, the Moon, and several other worlds. Not to mention, NASA also sends astronauts into orbit where they could conduct research at the International Space Station, also known as ISS. All in all, at any given time there could be folks in space. It's just become such a regular occurrence, most of us have stopped caring. Still a big deal though. Coming in at number 2, we have the moon landing. On July 20th, 1969, Commander Neil Armstrong and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin touched down on the surface of the moon, with Armstrong becoming the very first person to ever step onto the lunar surface. Armstrong and Aldrin spent around 21 hours on the lunar surface at a site they named Tranquility Base, before lifting off to rejoin Columbia in lunar orbit. Ever since that day, there have been countless conspiracy theories surrounding the Apollo moon landing, claiming that some, some, if not all, of the elements of the Apollo program and the associated moon landings were hoaxes staged by NASA. Of course, the most notable claim is that the 6 crewed landings on the moon were fake, and that 12 Apollo astronauts did not actually walk on the moon. Now, some claim that the technology to send men to the moon was lacking, or that Van Allen radiation belts, solar flares, solar wind, coronal mass ejections, and cosmic rays made such a trip impossible. Moon landing conspiracists focused heavily on NASA photos that were released to the public. In some photos, for example, the crosshairs appear to be behind objects. The cameras were fitted with Roseau plate, which is a glass plate with a reticle etched on, making it impossible for any photographed object to appear in front of the grid. Not to mention, like I said before, the astronauts could not have survived the trip because of exposure to radiation from the Van Allen radiation belt and galactic ambient radiation. Also, one of the final pieces of evidence is the simple fact that the flag seems to be fluttering, even though there is no wind on the moon. This in turn suggests that it was filmed on Earth and a breeze caused the flag to flutter. The flag, if on the moon, would have actually just faced downwards.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Hill and Dale, da 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 da, hippity hopping along.
And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Eye of Saturn. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun in our solar system, and the 2nd largest planet after Jupiter, that is. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but there is a massive anomaly on the north pole of the planet that has many people scratching their heads. It is aptly called the Eye of Saturn. The hexagon is about 20,000 miles wide and consists of air travelling at about 200 miles per hour, according to scientists at NASA. It has been said that the strange feature was spotted back in 1980s by NASA's Voyager mission and later revisited by Cassini-Huygens. Now, the hexagon is believed to be a jet stream made of atmospheric gases that seem to rotate. More interesting still, between 2012 and 2016, the hexagon changed from a mostly blue colour to more of a golden colour, and now appears to be mostly red deep inside the vortex of the hexagon itself. Now, some have scrutinised the pictures and have noted peculiar shapes and patterns in the eyes, leading some people to suggest that it is a strange mythological power at the centre of it all, much like the Eye of Sauron in The Lord of the Rings. However, there are some explanations for the hexagon's shape, with one hypothesis developed at Oxford University, which states that the hexagon forms when there is a steep gradient in the speed of the atmospheric winds in Saturn's atmosphere. Similar shapes are also created in the laboratory when a circular tank of liquid was rotated at different speeds at its centre and periphery. Personally, I prefer the Lord of the Rings theory. There is a higher power at play here. In at number 5, the Sally House, Atchison, Kansas. Built in the mid-1800s in Atchison, Kansas, the Sally House is believed to be haunted by a little girl named Sally, who died in the home during an appendicitis surgery. However, it was in the mid-1990s that Sally's story began to receive both local and national attention, when the owners at the time, Tony and Deborah Pickman, began noticing strange occurrences in the home, including attacks on Tony, unexplained voices, and burnt finger marks. After investigations were conducted by the Kansas Paranormal Group, it was discovered that Sally wasn't the only ghost haunting the house, but there was also a middle-aged woman. However, one paranormal believer has an explanation for the second ghost. They believe that this is in fact Sally's mother, who died not long after Sally passed away. She had attacked the doctor and died, with the spirits remaining in the home. The mother is said to still be grieving the loss of her child, and is the one who is said to attack visitors. However, Sally is said to be a happy ghost and tries to play with children that move in the house. Other paranormal experiences in the house include pictures being turned upside down, floating objects, disembodied voices, apparitions, toys being thrown around, and doors opening, closing, locking, and unlocking. The house is now standing vacant, with nobody wanting to live in the home. However, the house offers self-guided tours in September and October, as well as guided day tours and special overnight visits. In at number 4, the Myrtles Plantation, St. Francisville, Louisiana. The Myrtles Plantation is a historic home and former antebellum plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Built back in 1796 by General David Bradford, the plantation is reported to be one of America's most haunted homes. The plantation house is rumored to be on top of an ancient Indian burial ground, with it currently being a bed and breakfast and offering historical and mystery tours for ghost hunters. The plantation is said to be home to at least 12 different ghosts, with it often being reported that 10 murders occurred in the home. However, historical records only indicate the murder of William Winter. William Drew Winter was an attorney who lived in the plantation from 1865 until 1871, until he was shot by a stranger. After being shot, it is said that he staggered inside the house and died trying to climb the stairs. He died on the 17th step, and to this day, visitors as well as employees still hear his dying footsteps. Jumping ahead to 2002, Unsolved Mysteries filmed a segment at the plantation, and according to host Robert Stack, the production crew experienced technical difficulties during the production. It was also featured on the TV series Ghost Adventures, as well as on the series Most Terrifying Places in America.
Moving on to number 3, we have the Princess Theater Ghost. On March 3rd, 1888, an actor named Frederick Federici died suddenly on stage while performing his final scene. Very symbolic. Frederick was playing the role of a demon, and during his descent down through a trapdoor, which was supposed to represent his descent into hell, he suffered a heart attack and died. Now, legend goes that his ghost haunts the theater. In fact, all the cast members said that they saw Frederick on stage with them during their final bows for that show. Since that night, Frederick has been seen all throughout the theater. It's said that he likes to make an appearance on opening nights, and the cast believe that that is a sign of good luck. Coming in at number 2, we have the Crown Casino Morgue. If you ever go to Australia, why not go to Crown Casino, the largest casino in Australia? Maybe you could make it big. Well, that's exactly what attracts thousands of individuals to this casino. They all hope that they will be lucky enough to hit the jackpot. However, it's said that there is a morgue underneath this casino. According to this legend, a lot of people take their lives at this casino. Enough so that they needed to create a whole morgue to be able to store all the bodies. Having a morgue underneath the casino was their way to try and conceal the high mortality rate that they face. It's also said that there are trained workers there that deal with the bodies and carry them discreetly off the premise through secret passageways. There's even a related theory that the Yarra River is brown in color because of corpses from the casino being dumped into the water there. Although the Crown Casino has denied all these accusations, it's still a pretty creepy legend that some people believe to be true. And in our number 1 spot, we have Schneider's Alley. In the early 1900s, a man named Dr. Michael Schneider moved into a mansion with his wife and kids. On his large lot of land, the doctor also had a cabin in which he would treat his patients. It's said that his patients normally had schizophrenia or suffered from other mental illnesses. He treated them in his cabin to keep them away from his family. All was going well until his wife and daughters unexpectedly died. This caused him to go mad. Legend goes that after the passing, the doctor started to torture his patients. He would perform surgical experiments on them without anesthesia, and the screams could be heard around the area. Some even say that he would dismember his patients. It's said that he murdered dozens of victims. Legend goes that the area is haunted by the ghost of the Mad Doctor and his victims. Apparently there have been about 100 ghost sightings in the area, but none have been confirmed. If you're brave enough, why don't you take a stroll down this haunted area known as Schneider's Alley or Andrew's Walk and see for yourself. And that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below what place you want me to do an urban legend video on next. Now it's time to move on.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Lotus Pond. Across all cultures, bodies of water are considered scary in some way or another. Ships have sunk, people have drowned, bad weather has brewed, etc., etc. There's a certain mysticism to water, and we as human beings are fascinated by it. Of course, water on its own can't be scary. We've got to add something else to the mix. How about water plus adultery plus murder? Everyone's got to be afraid of at least one of those things. All classic themes. So here is the tale of the Lotus Pond. One day, a young woman was waiting for her boyfriend by a lotus pond. As she waited and waited, she got more impatient. He was making her wait, the bastard. After a while, she decided to look around and see if he had maybe been waiting for her at the wrong spot. During her search, she discovered something quite awful. Her lover was away loving someone else. As one might imagine, she did not take this news well. In a fit of sorrow, she threw herself into the lotus pond and drowned. Nobody knows what happened to her boyfriend, but I think it's safe to assume that the next time he walked by the pond, her spirit dragged him into the murky water. These days, it's said that if a couple plans to meet by the lotus pond, they'd better be very careful. The ghost of the girl will call out to any boy nearby, and if he even so much as looks towards the water, he'll be drowned. And that's what you get for even looking, you dirty dog. Now, the lotus pond has such a bad reputation that many folks refuse to go near it. And if you do decide that it would be a great spot for a picnic, you'd better bring your horse blinders. If you hear a girl calling out near this pond, don't respond, don't look, hell, don't even turn towards the sounds, unless you really, really like chilling below the water. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Poor, Poor Maid. Who's ready for some more adulterous urban legends? So this one's a little more macabre than the jilted pond dweller. This story comes from one of the preeminent Chinese supernatural writers, Gan Bao. Apparently his father was a bit of a womanizer and had maintained a long-running affair with one of the family's maids. This didn't sit well with Gan's mother, who begrudgingly allowed it to happen for years. However, when the father died, she decided to take revenge. The family had a tomb made for Bao's dad, meant to eventually house the mother as well, but when old Daddy-O was buried, the mother also had the maid buried with him, alive. That's some hardcore revenge right there, don't you think? For years, the maid remained underground in the tomb, unbeknownst to anyone other than the mother. Then, 10 years after the death of the father, the mother joined him in the afterlife. Gan Bao had the tomb opened up so they could place her body there as well, and came across an unpleasant surprise. Firstly, he never knew that his mother had the maid buried alive, so there's that little shock to start us off. But amazingly, she was still alive. Emaciated and weak for sure, but alive nonetheless. She was nursed back to relative health and questioned about her survival tactics. Had she been crawling out for sustenance and then returning to the tomb out of some self-flagellating guilt? Had she foraged for grubs and wastewater? In the end, the only explanation she could give was that the ghost of the father had brought her all she needed to survive for years. I suppose he felt bad that his wife had punished this young worker in such a horrible way. Nobody has seen any ghosts walking around with food and water near the tomb since, but folks definitely keep an eye out just in case. Coming in at number 3, we've got ghastly future seers. Folks who claim to be able to see the future are found in pretty much every culture too. There's something about not knowing what will happen next that makes some people desperate for information. So of course, psychics and soothsayers have come out of the woodwork to try and leverage some expertly vague predictions. However, when somebody can predict events extremely accurately over a short period of time, you have to wonder if something paranormal is going on. There was a case in Panchgani where a woman claimed that she could see 15 minutes into the future. At first, her family thought she was joking. Soon, she was able to tell them exactly what would happen over the next 15 minutes with incredible accuracy. This both impressed and terrified her family. After her predictions became more truth than fiction, she started denying herself food. She wouldn't eat, drink, or take medication. To make matters worse, the family refused to seek help for her as they were afraid of the stigma surrounding her purported abilities. They were eventually able to get some help from a paranormal investigative team who brought holy objects imbued with positive energy. The prevailing theory was that the woman was possessed by a dark spirit who was then using her for personal gain. A side effect of this was her future sight. Once the paranormal team showed up with their implements, the spirit appeared to leave her body, taking with it the Nostradamic effects. Could demons and spirits provide us with visions of the future? It's hard to say for sure, but this story seems to say so. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Lonavala ghost. This tale comes from a member of the Indian paranormal team. They've been investigating paranormal activity for the better part of a decade, doing plenty of ghost walks in purportedly haunted areas all over India. A lot of the places they visit have, well, exaggerated reputations, but apparently a trip to Lonavala uncovered more than what they bargained for. Lonavala is known for being a romantic getaway of sorts, with plenty of greenery and tiered waterfalls to boot. Apparently ghosts find it an attractive place too. The team member who told the story was with 4 other people, and they had stopped their car for a smoke break. The wind was blowing westward, and all of a sudden a can flew south against the current. The group was a little freaked out by this. They went back to the car and found that the windshield was totally fogged up from the inside. At this point, they knew something was up, so they asked any presence to reveal itself. Nothing happened, so they all got in the car. Right before they drove away, there was a knock at the window. However, the 5 paranormal investigators were sure that they were the only ones around. After this knock, the car began to shake violently. One person described it as if they were in a tin of biscuits. Being seasoned paranormal investigators, they all took out their recording devices. A woman could be heard speaking in Marathi and told the tale of her death. She and some friends had come out to Lonavala and were lost. Before she could find her bearings, she took a wrong step and fell off a cliff, and she's roamed the area as a ghost ever since. The team asked if there's anything they could do to help her pass on to the next life, but she never responded. So take this as a warning. No matter how picturesque a location is, there might be something sinister lurking in the shadows. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Udhampur Army Quarters. This one is well known enough that people will tell you to actively avoid the area if you're on vacation. This old military compound is said to be haunted by supernatural souls. Locals have seen floating apparitions for years. These specters will appear in the sky for a few seconds at a time before disappearing into the dark. To make things spookier, as these spirits fade away, they make weird noises and produce flashes of light. This petrifying display has disturbed folks for ages. Some say that these figures are the ghosts of long-dead soldiers visiting their old stomping grounds. Others claim that they're apparitions of ghouls visiting Earth looking to cause trouble. Even though these oddities have only been spotted between 1 and 3 a.m., many warn people away from the area entirely.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Corpse Collector. Legend has it that a mysterious, deadly person roams around Russia. This person is out stalking individuals to kidnap. After successfully kidnapping them, he will kill them, preserve them, and then display their mummified bodies. As a result, people in Russia were scared to roam the streets at night alone with fear of running into the Corpse Collector. Now, what's even more terrifying is that in 2011, this urban legend came to life. A man named Anatoly Moskvin was arrested for grave robbing. He would dig up the bodies of females, mummify them, dress them up as dolls, and display them in his home. The dolls were found seated on shelves, sofas, or chairs all throughout his home. Apparently, their faces and limbs were covered in cloth, so you couldn't tell that they were composed of real humans. In fact, his home was shared with his parents, and they were completely oblivious. They just thought that the corpses were large dolls that he created. Quite creepy. Who knows if he was inspired by the Corpse Collector legend, or if the real Corpse Collector is still out there somewhere. And at number 4, we have the buzzer. Those of you who are well versed in Russian urban legends have probably heard of this one. So there's a Russian radio station that has been broadcasting a buzz since the 1970s. As a result, this radio station was nicknamed the Buzzer. It's said that every few months, the buzzing is interrupted with a voice saying UVB 76 and then a series of random numbers and words. Then the buzzing continues. No one knows what this means, but there are several theories out there. Legend goes that it's a military communication system, or a dead man switch system in case of a nuclear strike. Maybe the radio station contains a bunch of coded messages for Russian spies. Or maybe it is a dead man switch system that can launch a counter-strike in times of nuclear war. Who knows? But it's still a very creepy mystery and urban legend.
Coming in at number 3, we have HIV oranges. On the topic of unwanted bodily fluids in our foods and beverages, let's consider the curious case of the contaminated citrus. In February of 2015, somebody posted an image of sliced oranges on Facebook. The oranges had little bits of red coloration in them, and they were not blood oranges. Or were they? According to the poster, the oranges had come from Libya and were seized in Algeria on the grounds that they had been injected with HIV-positive blood. The post read, "The immigration services of Algeria recovered a large quantity of these oranges coming from Libya. These oranges were injected with positive tested HIV and AIDS blood. Please share this message and warn people of the dangers involved." I mean, if the wording of that message doesn't convince you someone put their blood in oranges, I don't know what will. The image was found all over the place after that, with people either being really skeptical of the bloody fruit or having absolute freak-out meltdowns. Regardless of the reaction, there's no real threat here. Firstly, it's obviously a hoax based on the baselessness of the claims and the lack of official language in the original post. Somebody just decided that oranges coming from Africa must have some sort of HIV risk involved, as weird xenophobic people tend to do. Secondly, there is no threat of HIV transfer either way. HIV can't be transferred via fruit. The rare cases where HIV has been transferred via foods happens when food is pre-chewed by an HIV-infected caregiver. And these oranges, not pre-chewed. You can't get HIV from consuming food handled by an HIV-positive person. Even if it did contain small amounts of blood, which it likely doesn't, the virus would be destroyed by exposure to air, heat, or stomach acid. And who would put blood in an entire shipment's worth of oranges anyways? Coming in at number 2, we have Obamacare microchips. What a fun pairing of words, am I right? Back when Obamacare was first being introduced, people spread rumors that US residents would be required to be implanted with RFID microchips. Because, you know, Obama, I guess. But rumors of Big Brother wanting you riddled with tracking devices have been around since that kind of technology was first dreamed up. Folks are always worried that the government's going to tie them down and staple a blinking sensor into your spine or something. The Obamacare microchip legend began with some real documentation though. However, there were two things wrong with the rumor. One, it was taken from an outdated piece of tabled legislation that never passed, and two, the legislation they were looking at was misread and misinterpreted. See, someone pulled the phrase, "this sort of device be implanted in the majority of people who opt to become covered by the public healthcare option" out of some healthcare legislation in 2010. This particular passage was used as damning evidence that Obama wanted to track every citizen come hell or high water. However, this sentence was from an earlier version of legislation that wasn't passed by Congress. And if you're worried that Congress attempted to pass some bills that mandated microchips for every American, fret not. It was actually referring to a healthcare registry that would allow the Department of Health and Human Services to collect data about medical devices like pacemakers and hip replacements. It was meant to help track effectiveness and facilitate the distribution of manufacturer recall notices. No microchips necessary. It makes sense that people are scared of having their every move tracked though. There's something ironic about that crowd sharing these theories on Facebook for iOS though. And finally at number 1, Charlie Charlie. A sort of modernized Bloody Mary, Charlie Charlie was a spirit summoning game for the online era. In 2015, the Charlie Charlie Challenge blew up. Videos of kids putting 2 pencils on a piece of paper labeled yes and no were everywhere. Apparently, if done correctly, you could get a demon or ghost to answer simple questions. The origins of said demon or ghost varied widely depending on who you asked. Some said it was a Mexican spirit, and others said it was a child who was abused. Earlier tellings of the story seemed to favor the child, which in retrospect makes sense. What kind of Mexican ghost has the name Charlie? Carlos, maybe, but there's no Spanish history in the name Charles. Regardless of the ghost's backstory, it scared a whole lot of people. Most of the movement in the pencils could probably be attributed to gravity in the wind, or the nervous shaking and breathing of whoever set it up, but folks really thought there was a demon in their presence. To double down on the urban legenditude, it was also claimed that Charlie Charlie was a viral marketing scheme. People seem to think that the marketing team behind the movie The Gallows created the challenge to market their movie. Snopes stepped up and did some background research and found that early examples of the challenge predated the movie and its marketing. However, the idea that the Gallows co-opted the viral spookfest and used it smartly to promote their product isn't too far-fetched. Starting us off at number 5, we've got the Pied Piper. We all know the legend of the Pied Piper at this point. This legend slash fairy tale dates way back and has different regional variations. Some say that the flautist drew snakes away from a town, others say it was rats. In various versions of the stories, Mr. Pied Piper can be portrayed as generous, greedy, benevolent, or evil. It's all up to the storyteller. However, in Transylvania's version, he was a terrifying hypnotist. See, at some point, there was an abundance of rats in a small German town. The townsfolk didn't know what to do until the Pied Piper showed up. Using his bewitching tunes, he paraded the rats out of town, never to return. He came back to the village expecting to be lauded as a hero and paid a sum of money, and neither of these things happened. He did his very best to convince the townsfolk that his services were worth their weight in gold, but they never did pay him. This made him quite upset. Leaving the town, he came up with a horrible revenge scheme. The next week, he returned, musical instrument in hand. This time, the goal was not rats or other pests. No, he wanted to lure away the town's children. And so he did, playing a new, hypnotizing song that tugged at the hearts and minds of all the kids around. He once again paraded out of town, but this time with their future in tow. By the time all the adults realized what had happened, it was too late. What did the Pied Piper do with these children? Well, there are different theories. A particularly grim idea is that he led them all right off a cliff, like human lemmings. Yikes. Another less terrible one that'll link us to Transylvania is that he led them to a cave in the region and sealed it up. Eventually, the kids did escape and they settled in the Romanian countryside. Some say that's why you can find plenty of blonde-haired, blue-eyed German speakers in the area. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Liar's Bridge. Oh, you're all in trouble. I see you down in the comments posting first like 10 comments deep and claiming that you don't like my shirts. I know fraud when I see it. Nobody better try to cross that bridge unless you're down to die. Okay, I'll elaborate. There's a bridge in Sibiu that has quite the reputation. It's said that anyone who lies while crossing it will cause it to collapse. That is serious. This legend has become so popular that many brides-to-be are required to declare their love and purity while crossing it. And if they're being dishonest, Well, of course, there's no way that the bridge would still be standing if this were really the case, as people love to lie. However, some have a less dramatic tale to tell, that the bridge will make certain noises upon the delivery of a lie, which could have something to it. The origins of the lying bridge are up in the air, but there are a few different explanations. Some claim that lying or adulterous spouses and fiancés would be tossed off the bridge if their impropriety was discovered. This would definitely explain the modern practices associated with the bridge. Others say that merchants who cheated their customers would be met with the same fate: overcharge or sell something under false pretenses and take a dip. It could also originate with tales of cadets coming to town, wooing local lasses, promising them the world, and then disappearing forever. I would say that all these scenarios could result in a bridge famous for ending liars. Would you be willing to take a stroll across the footpath? Coming in at number 3, we've got the Talking Angela app, unsafe for kids. I'm sure most people have heard some version of the story before, an app that spies on your kids and gets them to share personal information. Maybe it's run by hackers or pedophiles or both. This was a very popular tale when Talking Angela, a widely available app, was at the peak of its popularity. Kids could talk and interact with a Parisian cartoon cat with features like facial recognition, voice playback, and a text-based chatbot. Rumors about Talking Angela's safety had been circulating since release, with all sorts of folks claiming that it was a luring tool for pedophiles or a front for hackers to speak with children. This led to the urban legend getting a little bit out of hand, with Facebook moms posting all sorts of ridiculous stuff that even got picked up by news organizations. A lot of these posts read something like, "Attention, parents and grandparents, do not download this app. I just saw a post from another mom and it says that it takes pictures of your kids without you knowing, and it also knows where your kids are, and it asked my precious Caden what his name was and where he went to school. Oh, delete it right away or else." It's all very sensational, but hey, it's a new era of urban legends. Not all of this is totally unfounded though. Although it has been proven that Talking Angela is not run by hackers or pedophiles, it can engage in chat and ask questions, and it can share photos to social media. However, these features must be turned on by the user. I think the real lesson here is, don't leave little Taylor and Skylore alone with the iPad. They don't know any better. Coming in at number 2, we've got scary clown murders. Oh man, 2016 seems like it was so long ago at this point. I feel like I'm dredging up ancient memories that are actually only 4 years old. Who remembers the killer clown phenomenon, when creeps and freaks would wander around town in clown costumes carrying weapons? That was a wicked urban legend. Sure, plenty of folks were posting videos and pictures of the clowns meandering around, but most, if not all of these, were hoaxes. People had heard the rumors of it happening and decided to contribute to the legend in their own way. The first big story, though, was from the Global Sun, who reported that weapon-toting clowns had crossed the US border into Canada and killed 23 people. Yikes. People glommed onto this and it spread like wildfire. Unfortunately, not too many people read the whole article. If they clicked the link and made it to the bottom of the page, they would have realized that the Global Sun was a fake news site that doesn't publish factual stories. But by the time anyone had figured that out, it was too late. Clown fever had taken North America by storm. You couldn't log on to any social media without seeing some POV video of someone being menaced by a rubber-masked assailant in the middle of the night. It even got to the point where residents of Greenville, South Carolina reported that clowns were trying to lure kids into the woods. Like most urban legends, there was no real evidence to back any of this up. It just seemed like people's innate fear of clowns was being exploited. And finally, at number 1, we have Ebola zombies. Just like the more recent Corona zombies hoax, this story became legendary when somebody tried to capitalize on the fear and uncertainty surrounding a pandemic. After a Liberia-based newspaper published accounts of 2 Ebola victims coming back to life under mysterious circumstances, the internet exploded with theories and stories. Anything zombie-related seems to have a wicked grip on the minds of people everywhere, so this kind of story really sets the imagination alight. Remember the bath salt zombies and voodoo zombies? People just want a zombie apocalypse, I guess. So after the newspaper published a story about 2 women coming back to life, the locals started to panic. They thought that women were ghosts and shouldn't live among them. Eventually, it got enough traction to make it to an international news outlet, but all the reports were missing key details. There was no information on how or when the patients were declared dead, and there was nothing on what happened between their deaths and their resurrections. Seems a little fishy, right? Well, the rumors died down after a while, but reports of a 3rd victim coming back to life resurrected the Ebola zombie narrative. Even though this 3rd case appeared to be satire, the internet was once again ablaze with Ebola zombie chatter. Since then, there have been no additional reports on these so-called zombies and no corroborating resurrections. So if there were Ebola zombies, there weren't too many of them, and their animation was not contagious. Kicking us off at number 5, we've got the Red Room Curse. If you're familiar with the dark web, or maybe even some Cronenbergian techno fetishes, you might assume that Red Room means murder broadcast, and technically, you're correct. But there's more than one Red Room out there, and the one we'll discuss today is a little less voyeuristic. just as online though. The Red Room is an internet legend about a cursed pop-up that would appear from time to time on people's computers. It would show a door and ask, "Do you like the Red Room?" Now you can answer yes or no or maybe, but the result is going to be the same. People who have come across the pop-up are invariably found dead. Their room becomes the Red Room, with the walls covered in their blood. Shortly after the legend gained traction, a flash animation of a boy cursed by the pop-up showed up. It was quite popular at the time. In fact, it linked a real-life murder to the Red Room curse. The schoolgirl that committed the Sasebo slashing in 2004 was found to be a fan of the flash animation. The 11-year-old student killed her classmate with a utility knife, slashing her throat and arms. When questioned by police, she admitted to the crime and said that she had been bullied online. The girl she killed had called her a goody-goody and made mean comments about her weight. In addition to bookmarking the Red Room animation, it's also worth noting that the killer had read and watched Battle Royale, where school-age students fight to the death. Now, links between violent media and violence are always weak at best, but this is quite the interesting development. I knew pop-ups were annoying, but to lead to something like this? Sheesh. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Khooni. While researching this, I also found that Khooni is a very cute breed of pig. No relation. But if you get scared, maybe consider taking a look at a picture of a pig or two to take your mind off the spooks. The Japanese urban legend Khooni is a lot less cute. In fact, try to look too close and you'll really regret it. The myth originated online around 2003 with people giving first-hand accounts of seeing this being. These reports were not unlike early accounts of Slender Man, with folks claiming to have seen or photographed something strange with bad things happening afterwards. Khooni translates roughly to wriggling body, which is exactly what it does. It's a slender humanoid made of white paper or fabric that appears in fields on hot summer days around lunchtime. It's been seen on wide open rice fields most often, and sometimes even over open water. If there is a great expanse, you might see Khooni off in the distance. This thing wiggles its limbs about endlessly, as if it's being constantly blown by wind, even when there is none. It can only be seen from a distance. Interestingly enough though, people that seem to be right beside it don't tend to notice its presence. People have reported seeing workers on fields go about their business without so much as a passing glance at the thing. If you do see one from far away, do not try to get any closer. Looking too closely at a Khooni can cause you to go insane, and if you try to get close enough to touch one, it might kill you. Keeping your distance and not attempting contact is the best strategy here. It ignores people who offer it the same amount of disregard. Now, because of all the details concerning distance and lack of close-up confrontation, many skeptics claim that Khooni is just people's overacting imaginations, misinterpreting maybe a scarecrow or a wick drain. But you will not find me hurtling through rice fields to find out.
Coming in at number 3, we have Polybius. Polybius is an urban legend that emerged back in the early 2000s, with it concerning a supposedly fictitious arcade game called Polybius. The legend describes the game as part of a government-run crowdsourced psychology experiment which was based in Portland during 1981. According to the legend, the game apparently produced intense psychoactive and addictive effects in players, with the machines being said to have been periodically visited by men in black for the purpose of data mining the machines and analysing the effects. Now, while the entire legend doesn't quite hold up, there are some pieces that are actually based in fact. Brian Dunning, host of the Skeptoid podcast, did some digging and discovered that a 12-year-old named Brian Maurer had become sickened during a 28-hour marathon video game contest in Portland back in 1981. Just a few short days later, the Portland arcades were raided by federal agents who seized cabinets that were being used for gambling. Add these two events and add some fictitious elements and you have the legend of Polybius. Coming in at number 2, we have Candyman. The Candyman is an urban legend that tells the story of a murdered slave who returns from the dead in search of revenge if you say his name 5 times. In 1992, a Candyman movie was released based on the short story The Forbidden by Clive Barker. This in turn sparked 2 sequels, as well as a slew of paranormal games that friends dare each other to play. According to the urban legend, if you look into a mirror and chant the name Candyman 5 times, he will appear behind you and kill you with his hook. Now, although this is a legend and you will likely not invoke him by saying his name, there is some reality to the story. In the Candyman movie, after saying his name 5 times, Candyman breaks through the medicine cabinet in a bathroom in order to kill his victim. This part is factual, believe it or not. Back in 1987, the Chicago Reader published a story about Ruth McCoy, a woman living in a Chicago housing project who called 911 insisting she was being attacked. When responders arrived, they found her shot body, with investigators determining that her assailants had gained access to her unit by climbing through her medicine cabinet, which adjoins the apartments. The complex was supposedly built that way so that plumbers could attend to leaks by simply removing the cabinet to reach the pipes. However, this in turn resulted in people using this method to burgle and murder. Absolutely terrifying. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Cropsey. Once upon a time, Cropsey was a mere urban legend, the boogeyman of Staten Island in New York City. Cropsey was rumored to be a homicidal madman who had escaped from a mental institution and had a hook for a hand, who supposedly hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system under an abandoned hospital. Parents would often use Cropsey as a way to frighten their children into being good and staying close to home. The urban legend became so popular it inspired a 1981 slasher movie called The Burning, which very quickly became a cult classic. However, what was thought to be fiction quite quickly became reality. In the 1980s, Cropsey came to life in the form of a deranged killer who really did kidnap children. He was called Andre Rand. Rand was a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, which would eventually be closed in 1987 due to corporate punishment and rampant sexual abuse. In 1981, Holly Ann Hughes did not return home after going to the store to buy soap. Rand supposedly pulled up, pulling Holly into his car and driving away. Then again in 1983, 11-year-old Thais Jackson was reported missing after her mother had sent her to purchase food. She never returned. She was last seen exiting the Mariners Harbor Motel in Staten Island days after Rand had been released from prison. Then in 1987, Jennifer Schweiger was reported missing, and her body was later found underground after a 35-day search. Rand was ultimately convicted of the crime. A documentary about the madman was made entitled Cropsey, in which they speculate that Rand may have been involved with Satanism and provided the children to be sacrificed. Ultimately, Rand was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2037, at which time he'll be 93 years old. Coming in at number 5, Alien Death Star. Lepidus is the 3rd largest natural satellite of Saturn, 11th largest in the solar system, and the largest body in the solar system known not to be in hydrostatic equilibrium. Now, the moon of Saturn looks somewhat like the infamous Death Star in the Star Wars franchise, with a large crater that resembles the fictional weapon's super laser focus lens. Now, for those who don't know, the Death Star is a fictional mobile space station and galactic superweapon which features in the Star Wars franchise and is absolutely terrifying to look at. Not to mention, it is a planet-killing machine that destroys entire worlds with its powerful laser. Back in 2016, Daily Mail released an article in which they questioned whether Saturn's moon could in fact be an alien Death Star. Experts are unsure how Lepidus formed, but one Martian researcher believes that it was made from scratch by an alien civilization. An image taken back in 2004 seems to show a line stretching around the moon's equator, and a massive crater on top that some say looks identical to a fictional artificial weapon. According to alien hunter and YouTuber Tyler from Secure Team, he explained, I quote, "There are some very prominent researchers out there who have theorized that Lepidus is a constructed object. It's artificial." Now, Lepidus has been called the yin-yang moon, as it has a light and dark face that creates a contrast on the surface. Now, after some images surfaced from Cassini, an unmanned spacecraft, they appear to reveal an array of unusual anomalous features around Lepidus. A massive ridge that is 16,000 kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide and stretches around the equator. It looks as if there were 2 separate pieces, and it looks as if they were welded together, Tyler stated. In at number 4, we have Planet 9. Planet 9 is a hypothetical planet in the outer region of the solar system. This hypothetical super-Earth-sized planet would have a predicted mass of 5 to 10 times that of Earth, and an elongated orbit 400 to 800 times as far from the Sun as the Earth. The planet itself, if real, would be absolutely terrifying. It is massive and almost totally black, making it resemble a black hole more than a planet. Now, back in April 2016, the New York Post tweeted, I quote, "A newly discovered planet could destroy Earth as soon as this month." An accompanying video also claimed that the new planet would be throwing all sorts of asteroids and comets at Earth, which would in turn destroy the planet. Now, the planet has not been confirmed to even exist. However, astronomers are actively looking for it to explain motions of some objects in the icy Kuiper Belt, a region of icy objects beyond Neptune. However, sorry to disappoint some of you folks, but if the planet is actually found, the California Institute of Technology's Mike Brown says the planet will pose no threat to Earth, or life on Earth. Take that as you will. I'm disappointed.
In our third spot, we have the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In 1986 in Ukraine, an accident in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant caused the reactor to explode. This explosion had lasting effects, and to this day it's still considered the worst nuclear disaster. Well, according to some survivors of this incident, they claim that shortly before the nuclear plant meltdown, they all experienced nightmares, received threatening phone calls, and had encountered a huge winged bird creature. Legend goes that these were all warning signs that the disaster was going to happen. So the bird was described as a large creature like man with huge wings and red eyes. Some even claim that they saw it over one of the reactors as it went through the meltdown. People then drew the connection between this beast and the Mothman of West Virginia. The Mothman apparently showed up right before the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967. So legend goes that if you see these creatures, then something bad is going to happen. So if you ever do encounter this bird creature, maybe go home and lock yourself inside. Who knows what tragedy will follow. Moving on to number 2, we have the Russian sleep experiment. This started off as a creepypasta, but now some people are convinced that it is in fact a true story. Legend goes that in the 1940s, Russian researchers were conducting unethical tests on enemy prisoners. They captured 5 enemies that they planned to keep awake for 30 days using a gas-based stimulant. They wanted to see the effects that sleep deprivation had on the brain. As a result, they were sealed into a chamber with a promise that if they cooperated, then they would be freed afterwards. For the first 5 days, everything went fine. After these 5 days, that's when it took a dark twist. Eventually, one of the prisoners screamed until he shredded his vocal cords. As each day passed, more terrifying stuff started to happen. When they decided to open the chamber to check on them, they were horrified. The floor was covered in blood and one of the prisoners was dead with some of his flesh scattered throughout the chamber. The other 4 test subjects also had parts of their body torn off, but this wasn't from attacking each other. In fact, it was all self-inflicted. Even some of them had exposed bones and deep wounds. They were then going to be given medical attention, but all the prisoners said that they no longer wanted to be freed. They all kept saying that they just needed the gas that kept them awake. One eventually fell asleep and immediately flatlined. 2 of the other prisoners passed away also. The remaining one went on a rampage. These prisoners that everyone saw was apparently the evil inside the human mind that is kept sane by sleeping. Since they hadn't been sleeping, it unleashed this evil. So yeah, definitely make sure to get at least 6 hours of sleep every night just to be safe. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Curse of the Ivan Vassili. The Ivan Vassili was a ship built around 1897 as a civilian steam freighter for transporting freight across the Baltic Sea. But as war broke out, the ship was repurposed into a military supply ship for the Russian Navy. Now, no one knows what went wrong, but the crew on board all started to feel like they were being watched. They would hear eerie footsteps and would be hit with random cold bursts. They could just feel that something was starting to go wrong. Then, according to the legend, one night all the crew members suddenly went berserk and started fighting each other for no reason. One crew member even jumped overboard and took his own life. There was like a cloud of negativity hanging over the ship. A few days later, another crew member also jumped overboard. But that's not all. Apparently one of the crew members also spotted a ghostly figure appear from a glowing mist, and it just glided across the ship's deck. As a result of all the odd things that kept occurring while aboard this ship, when they reached land, over a dozen men fled the ship. Some were so scared that they even jumped from the ship and swam to shore. Those that remained on board would continue to witness odd things, and more men would jump overboard. It's said that some sort of evil force had possessed the ship. As a result, the ship was burned down, but to this day, we don't know what truly happened aboard this ship. Starting off this countdown, we have Fisher's Ghost. This is a pretty popular urban legend and ghost story in Australia. In fact, they even have a festival for this urban legend. It's called the Festival of Fisher's Ghost, and it's been celebrated since 1956 in Campbelltown. There was even a silent film made in 1924 based on this legend. So it said that on June 17th, 1826, a man named Frederick Fisher, a farmer from Campbelltown, mysteriously disappeared without a trace. His friend, George Worrell, claimed that he had went back to England. He even said that he received a letter from Fisher saying that he wasn't going to be returning to Australia. A couple of months later, a local man said that he saw the ghost of Mr. Fisher sitting on the rail of a nearby bridge. Apparently, the ghost pointed to the creek and then disappeared. After searching the creek, Fred's remains were found, and George was arrested for the murder. Obviously, anyone could have guessed that. Now it's said that if you return to the bridge at night, you'll be able to see Fisher's ghostly body sitting on the edge staring into the creek. As a result of this legend, the creek has been named as Fisher's Ghost Creek. In our fourth spot, we have the drop bears. Who here is a fan of koalas? Koalas are so cute and are anything but scary, right? Well, yeah, maybe, but their relatives, the drop bear, are definitely not. Legend goes that there are carnivorous predators known as drop bears that closely resemble koalas. It's said that these predators inhabit treetops in Australia. There are just too many stories of tourists getting viciously attacked by these creatures. It's also said that they can grow to the size of a leopard, and their arms are so powerful that they can just tear their victims into pieces. Now, this one is indeed a hoax. Thankfully, there are no giant koala-type beasts. A lot of people wonder.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Bao Bao. It really does seem that every culture has their own version of the boogeyman. I suppose parents got really fed up with their young children, eh? Something we can all relate to. Bao Bao is exactly that, a Romanian boogeyman. However, I find this figure to be even scarier than lots of the other children snatchers. See, the Bao Bao stays in the same home as the kids. This cloaked figure is believed to appear whenever children misbehave, and is always waiting for his chance from a hiding place somewhere in the house. Sometimes it's the broom closet, other times it's the storeroom. Either way, I bet this knowledge scared the daylights out of a bunch of Transylvanian kids. Imagine playing around and coming face to face with the door concealing a mysterious man who will take you away for acting up. With this knowledge, I bet kids were actually quite well behaved. Unlike boogeymen in other cultures, the kidnappings also only last for a little while. The Bao Bao will grab disobedient kids and hold on to them for a year. So you don't immediately get turned into soup or drowned in a river, but instead you have to live with this terrifying man for 365. Give or take. No friends, no family, no good food, just hard work and a scary supervisor. If anyone did get taken away, it probably scarred them for life. After the year, they get returned home, and I'm sure their lives are never the same. Coming in at number 2, we've got the ghosts of Teleki Mansion. Here we go, some real Transylvanian ghost stories. The region is known for its beautiful architecture and castles, so there's no surprise that all sorts of ghastly tales are attached to the ornate buildings. Unfortunately, Dracula's castle is Bram Stoker's invention and doesn't really exist. But there are plenty more spooky facades from where that came from. One such tale originates in the Teleki Mansion. This rundown and abandoned building was once an extravagant abode, but these days most locals do their best to avoid it. It's actually relatively close to the university town of Cluj-Napoca, in a smaller town called Okna Mures. Legend says this mansion is haunted by the drunken ghosts of soldiers. During the Second World War, a squad of soldiers broke into the mansion. They'd heard that there was plenty of good wine in the cellars and decided it would be a good night to imbibe. After locating the gigantic barrels, they had themselves a grand old time. As soldiers tend to do when given downtime with lots of alcohol, they got drunk. A little too drunk, probably. I say this because they ended up goofing around with their guns and firing them inside of the mansion. After causing a mess and a half, one unlucky marksman hit an unintended target. His bullet pierced one of the gigantic barrels, which started to flood the cellar. In all likelihood, a couple of barrels were probably punctured. Gallons and gallons of wine rushed into the underground room, drowning the soldiers before they could escape. I suppose that's as good a way to go as any, drowning in wine. Although I think the soldiers might have enjoyed it a little bit more if it was in their bellies rather than their lungs. And finally, at number 1, we've got people eating lakes. Sorry to all you Great Lakes swimmers out there, the Transylvanian bodies of water tend to be a little more aggressive than others. Of course, they don't actually eat people, but they drown enough experienced swimmers that folks started to claim that they had an appetite. One such lake is Lake Vendrell, which is known for devouring even the most skillful of swimmers. Remember folks, don't eat before going swimming, always have a buddy, and try to avoid voracious waterways. If the disappearances of swimmers wasn't enough, locals have also been known to find bloody chunks of people floating around. That doesn't usually happen when somebody drowns, right? Another lake famous for consuming is Lesser Lake. Apparently this oversized puddle once drowned an entire town. Something gave way, causing the lake to flood in and envelop everything. Neighboring towns thought the church was celebrating something based on all the noise the bells were making, but nope, the bells were ringing because the church was literally descending under the water. So yeah, you better watch your back around those Transylvanian lakes. They'll grab you before you can say backstroke.
Coming in at 5, rats in the toilet. Urban legends about animals in sewers have been rife throughout history, with the most notable being the alligators and crocodiles in the sewers of New York, which for the most part actually turned out to be true. However, the thought of finding something in your toilet inches away from vulnerable areas of your body, well, that's something nobody wants to think about. While the alligators and crocodiles are a far reach, this legend seems to have some elements of truth. A toilet drain is just wide enough for a rat to climb up, first and foremost, with the animals being attracted to sewage lines due to undigested food in feces. They follow the pipes and boom, wind up in your toilet bowl. Back in 1999, a woman in Virginia got a nasty fright when she went to the toilet and found a rat there waiting for her. Honestly, I've never feared a toilet before, but I certainly do now. Apparently this has happened enough times for public officials to put out a warning. If you encounter a rat in your toilet, close the lid and flush. Godspeed. Coming in at number 4, the Bunny Man. The Bunny Man is an urban legend that originated in Fairfax County, Virginia back in 1970. The legend has many variations, but for the most part involves a man wearing a rabbit costume who attacks people with an axe or hatchet. Most of the stories occur around Colchester Overpass, a southern railway overpass spanning Colchester Road near Clifton, Virginia, sometimes referred to as Bunny Man Bridge. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from the bridge, but later escalated to the madman hanging teens in a similar manner. However, the legend is based out of reality. Following extensive research into the Bunny Man, the legend was linked to 2 cases of a man in rabbit costumes threatening people with an axe, with the vandalism reports occurring 10 days apart in 1970 in Burke, Virginia. The first incident occurred on the night of October 19, 1970 by US Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée, who were visiting relatives in Burke. While returning from a football game that evening, they reportedly parked their car in a field to visit an uncle who lived across the street. As they sat in the car, they noticed something moving outside the rear window. Moments later, the front passenger window smashed and there stood a figure in a bunny costume. As they drove away, the couple discovered a hatchet on the car floor. The second reported sighting occurred on the night of October 29, 1970, when construction security guard Paul Phillips approached a man standing on a porch of a home on Guinea Road. The man was wearing a white bunny costume and appeared to be around 20 years old. According to Paul, the man stated, I quote, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Now, while neither incidents resulted in death or disembowelment, the thought of an adult in a bunny costume wielding a hatchet is absolutely terrifying.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the last bus. In the same way that fears related to water and adultery cut across all cultures, it seems that late night public transit has a similar legacy. And really, why wouldn't it? Being in an enclosed space that is difficult to immediately exit late at night, traversing potentially unfamiliar terrain, is fertile ground for horrifying happenings. And just such a happening makes up the bones of this urban legend. In the mid-90s, a bus was heading to Beijing's Fragrant Hills. As it trucked along, 2 men attempted to flag it down. This was odd, considering that they were not at a bus stop, but the driver was feeling generous that day. Turns out there were 3 men, 2 of which wore traditional ancient robes, and 1 more who was being held up by the other 2. As the bus rolled along, it slowly emptied until there were only 2 passengers left, not counting the 3 latecomers. A young man and an old woman both sat there looking at these pale passengers. Suddenly, the old woman accused the young man of stealing her wallet and demanded that the bus driver let them off so they could take this matter to the police. When they got off, the man was furious. Not only had she falsely accused him of committing a crime, she had also had them get off in the middle of nowhere. Not even a police station was nearby. However, she had a good reason to cry wolf. She'd noticed something nobody else had. The 3 men had no legs. They'd been floating at the height of standing men and therefore must have been ghosts. Who knows what might have happened if they'd stayed on that late night bus with the 3 phantoms. Coming in at number 2, we've got Single Braid Road. What could be a reference to the shape of the road is actually a morbid description of a terrible death that supposedly occurred here. Let this be a lesson to you all. Don't jump from trains. Okay, I'll explain. Way back when, it said that there was a young couple. The man had all of his paperwork sorted out, but the woman did not. She, being an illegal immigrant, was living a life a little on the edge. Partway through the journey, some police officers boarded the train in order to check everyone's passports and such. Realizing this would not end well for her, the young woman decided to hop off the train. Unfortunately, she had done her hair in a very structurally sound style that day, a single long braid. When she jumped out, her hair got caught in the window, ripping her scalp from her head and taking her face along with it. After having most of the skin on her head removed, she crawled her way to Single Braid Road and died there. Gruesome, right? Well, the story doesn't end there. Apparently, if you head down Single Braid Road, you might come across a young woman with a long braid. Only men can see her, supposedly. If you approach her, she'll turn towards you and reveal that she lacks any facial features. I'll leave you to imagine what might happen next. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Suicide Shopping Center. Look, I get it. Sometimes malls make me want to hop over the guardrail and into the fountain below. We've all been there. However, so many self-inflicted deaths have occurred at this shopping center, folks are starting to get suspicious. Since it opened in 2004, over a dozen folks have committed suicide outside of Liwan Plaza. Some say there's a mysterious presence that might give the unfortunate souls a little push. These claims are backed up by a variety of strange discoveries that occurred during the building of said plaza. See, while they were developing the land, 8 empty coffins were discovered buried below. They did their best to work around this seemingly cursed discovery, first by constructing the building to appear octagonal and then by contacting a Taoist priest. When the holy man arrived, he let the others know that the coffins were meant to prevent evil from spreading in that area. The thing is, the coffins can't do that job if they're removed in the process of building a shopping center. Uh-oh. Seems that the strange noises and unfortunate deaths tended to drive customers away. It's too bad, isn't it?